Minasan konnichiwa, this is Matt Okahara from the Matsumoto Castle Gun Corps, and in this upload we're going to be looking at after the samurai. The transition from samurai military to a professional military in Japan involved several key stages and reforms, primarily during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. These reforms were part of Japan's broader efforts to modernise and strengthen itself to avoid colonisation by Western powers, and it ultimately transformed Japan into a major military power, especially during the early 20th century. The Tokugawa shogunate ruled over Japan from 1603 until 1868. The samurai class served as the ruling military elite under the Tokugawa shogunate and maintained power and order through a feudal system. The Meiji Restoration, which was in 1868, marked the end of the shogunate and the restoration of imperial rule under Emperor Meiji. This period initiated significant political, social and military reforms. One of these reforms was the abolition of the samurai class. The new Meiji government sought to centralise power and diminish the influence of the samurai. The feudal system was replaced with a prefectural system, and the samurai class was effectively abolished, with former samurai being offered government bonds in exchange for their stipends. Of course, many samurai who saw that the end of their way of life was near, manoeuvred themselves so they would get preferential treatment when it came to positions in government or within the military. In 1873, the Meiji government introduced a conscription system requiring all males up to the age of 40 to serve in the military. They would have to serve for 9 years, 3 years full-time, 3 years as a reservist, and then 3 years as a supplementary reservist. This removed the need for the militia-based armies of old. And by the early 20th century, Japan had established a modern professional military. One of Japan's first major engagements was the Russo-Japanese War between 1904 and 1905. The conflict stemmed from rival imperial ambitions between Russia and Japan over Korea and Manchuria. Russia sought warm water ports and influence over East Asia, whereas Japan aimed to expand its territory and protect its interests. Tensions culminated in 1904 when Japan launched a surprise attack on the Russian naval base at Port Arthur, initiating hostilities without a formal declaration of war. Thereafter, several major battles followed, including the Battle of Tsushima in 1905. That battle was a decisive naval engagement where the Japanese Navy destroyed the Russian Baltic Fleet. Their victory solidified Japan's control over the seas and crippled Russian naval power in the region. Exhausted and facing internal political instability, in 1905, Russia sought peace. The Treaty of Portsmouth, which was mediated by President Theodore Roosevelt, ended the war. Japan gained control of Korea and parts of Manchuria, including Port Arthur and the South Manchurian Railway. This war marked the first time that an Asian power had defeated a European power in modern history. The victory bolstered Japanese nationalism and imperial ambitions as well. The Russo-Japanese War demonstrated Japan's emergence as a formidable military power and a significant player in international affairs. Fighting alongside the Entente powers, Japan's involvement in World War I highlighted its growing military and imperial ambitions. Japan had been allied with Britain since 1902 through the Anglo-Japanese alliance. Upon entering the war, Japan aimed to seize German holdings in Asia and the Pacific. In 1914, Japan's first major action was at the Siege of Tsingtao, a German-controlled port in China. British and Japanese forces successfully captured the port, demonstrating Japan's military strength and securing a strategic foothold in China. Japan then went on to swiftly occupy German territories in the Pacific, including Mariana, Caroline and Marshall Islands. Their involvement in World War I accelerated its military and industrial modernization, and it boosted national pride even further. So as we can see, the end of the samurai brought around a huge military and imperial expansion. As a case study of military and political expansion, we can look at the 50th Infantry Regiment, which was based in Matsumoto. The 50th Infantry Regiment was formed in 1905 during the Japanese-Russian War. At that time, the Japanese Department of the Army was seeking an appropriate place to garrison the regiment. Learning of this, the municipal government of Matsumoto town petitioned to have the regiment located within Matsumoto. The petition was subsequently granted, and the regiment entered Matsumoto on the 2nd of November 1908. Next to the regimental headquarters, which is now the site of a university, a barracks, a manoeuvre field and a firing range were also built. At its peak, there were 3 battalions consisting of 4 companies, and they were located within 6 barracks. That numbered about 2,000 men. The regiment was deployed to southern Manchuria from 1913 to 1914, and then in Siberia from 1920 until 1921. They were once again deployed to Manchuria between 1927 and 1929. In February 1932, just after the Manchurian incident of 1931, over 1,000 soldiers from the 50th Regiment were sent again to Manchuria. They returned to Matsumoto in May 1934. At the beginning of the Sino-Japanese War in July 1937, the regiment shipped from the port of Osaka to China and participated in various battles. They returned to Matsumoto in December 1939. Whenever the regiment returned to the base, a large number of citizens of Matsumoto came to greet them at the train station. Because of the 50th Infantry Regiment garrison, Matsumoto was known as a military town. With easy access to the Japanese Alps, the 50th Infantry Regiment was trained in mountaineering and became known as one of the best mountain units in Japan. Even to this day, the units based in Matsumoto that make up part of the Japanese Ground Self-Defense Force regularly train in alpine warfare. Japan's involvement in World War II began with its expansionist policies in Asia, leading to the invasion of China in 1937 and the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, which of course brought the United States into the war. Japan aimed to dominate Asia and the Pacific, but faced fierce resistance from the Allied forces. In March 1944, as enemy troops were threatening the Japanese homeland, the 50th Regiment, which was in Manchuria at the time, was sent to defend the Mariana Islands in the mid-Pacific. As things grew worse and defeat was looming, in a last-ditch effort, the regiment burned their regimental standard and threw themselves in a final attack against the Americans on August 2, 1944. The final days of World War II for Japan were marked by significant events that led to the country's surrender and the end of the war. Not only were there atomic bombings at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but also on the 8th of August 1945, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan and launched a massive invasion of the Japanese-occupied territory of Manchuria. This invasion further strained Japanese military resources and added pressure on the Japanese government to surrender. The Japanese leadership was divided on the issue of surrender. Emperor Hirohito played a crucial role in the decision. After the bombings and the Soviet invasion, the emperor himself convened an imperial conference where he expressed his desire for peace and for the war to end. The formal surrender of Japan took place on September 2, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. The Japanese Imperial Army and Navy had existed from 1873 until 1945, so 72 years. After the war, the 50th Infantry Regiment's garrison in Matsumoto became the Asahi campus of Shinshu University. This began Matsumoto's transformation from a military city to a city of education and culture, which is a reputation that it still enjoys today. At Shinshu University, one building of the war remains. The Food Commissary House, which is a red brick structure, is the only building left of the 50th Infantry Regiment. Outside of the building there is a simple plaque that reads, "This building, as a remnant of war, reminds us of the tragedy of war." I hope that you've enjoyed this upload about After the Samurai, and don't forget you can find us at www.gunsamurai.com.